Welcome. I'm Steve Ward, and today we're going to be talking about the shaver mystery. But first, I want to thank everybody for making this possible. A disappointment, of course, that we couldn't go to the Van Meter Festival as like we normally do. But it's very nice that a lot of people work together to make this part of it possible. There are some advantages to a virtual conference. And let me point out one. Chad Lewis likes to make old guy jokes, and I'm not sensitive at all. And I want Chad to know that I'm not keeping track of these jokes that he makes. Like the one when he was talking to Zelia Edgar on her podcast, Just Another Tinfoil Hat. He was talking something about how Steve Ward was doing research in 1978 and 1878. But I don't take any offense from it, and I'm not keeping track of any of this, not including the one where he suggested that I was around the same time the visitor was. So, but actually, I want to thank Chad because Chad takes good care of us. He had a house set up for us for the speakers this year, and of course, it didn't work out. But we all appreciate Chad's efforts for trying to make us comfortable. So, to move on, the shaver mystery. Sometimes it's called the Great Shaver Mystery. Sometimes it's called the Great Shaver Hoax. And you'll be able to decide what you think. We're going to do kind of a brief overview. This is one of these areas that it connects to so many different things and goes off into so many different directions. So we can only skirt through some of it. We'll just get a kind of a brief overview of the shaver mystery, and you can pursue it if you want. Now, I'm going to start out by being slightly autobiographical, but it only lasts about 5 seconds. I was born in Royal Oak, Michigan, at Royal Oak General Hospital. Royal Oak is just a few miles north of Detroit. And it was one of these little small community hospitals which went away a long time ago, gobbled up by the bigger hospitals. What I think is that after I was born, they wanted to go out on a high note, and so they just closed up. But I told you that to tell you this. If you go just about maybe half a dozen miles south of there, you'll cross the infamous 8 Mile Road. Now, I grew up just south of 9 Mile, so I didn't have any street cred at all. But if you keep going a little bit further, 8 Mile is the boundary between the northern suburbs and Detroit. You go down a little bit further, and you'll hit Highland Park, which is a sort of a captive suburb of Detroit. And if you go back to the early 30s, this is where the shaver mystery began, actually literally just miles away from where I was born. So a man named Richard Shaver, and we'll get more into him in a few moments. He was working at, I believe it was Briggs Auto. Yes, Briggs Auto Body, which actually became the first Ford plant. And he was spot welding. But when he would key in a particular welder, he would start to hear voices. And they weren't talking to him, but it's like he was tuned into a conversation. And it was really bizarre. And he got the impression, I guess, that these things were coming from beneath the earth. And they were saying things like they could cause planes to crash. They had the ability to cause planes to crash, cause car crashes. He said he heard the torment of people being tortured by these beings. Not something you really want to hear while you're at work, I don't think. And he even heard somebody talking about flying a spaceship in real time. So, and again, it only seemed to, it wasn't only then, but it really seemed to key in when he activated a particular welding gun. Well, we're going to leave Shaver for just a moment because that's kind of where things begin. And there are two really important men here that comprise the whole Shaver mystery. Of course, it's Richard Shaver and also Ray Palmer. Ray Palmer was eventually the one that went on to edit Amazing Stories, which was the pulp magazine which promoted the Shaver mystery. Ray Palmer was a survivor. When he was in second grade, he was hit by a truck. His spine was fractured. He was laid up forever. He had a father, unfortunately, that was a drunk and a bastard. He did not take proper care of Ray. He did not get the proper medical attention that he needed. He, of course, missed a lot of school, but he was pronounced, this is the first time they said he was about to die. Of course, he didn't die. And, but what he did was it was at home, he was kind of strapped in some kind of an apparatus, and he read hundreds of books. You'll find that Richard Shaver was also someone that was kind of self-taught and was very well read. Now, Ray Palmer, when he was 13 years old, he came down with tuberculosis. So, and this laid him up for a couple of years. But when he got out, it was the first issue of Amazing Stories. And let me show you what they look like here. The original ones were kind of oversized, but these were from the first year of the publication. He actually bought the first issue, and it electrified him. The idea of science fiction was this was pretty early back then, the 1920s, and it was just something that just completely changed his life. This is Ray Palmer. He's standing next to the Kenneth Arnold's airplane. Kenneth Arnold, of course, was the first guy to coin the term flying saucer. He saw in 1947, what was it, 11 or 12 discs flying over Washington State. And it was Ray Palmer, and they became friends, and he wrote, he's the first one to write up Kenneth Arnold's story. Now, in 1929, he contracted tuberculosis again, and he had more problems with his spine because it affected the way it was connected. I'm not going to get too medical here, but he was in bad shape again. Again, they said, "Okay, you're going to die in just a few months," but he persevered. He was, you could say that he was maybe one of the first people to use creative visualization and positive thinking, because he imagined that his spine was fused together again and that he could walk. And when he did not die, and several months later when they took the x-ray, they found that in fact the cartilage, or whatever you want to call it, did fuse together, and he did survive and was able to walk and lead a normal life. And in fact, he in later years he married Marjorie Wilson, a great lady, and had 3 children. He built a small publishing empire, which started Fate magazine and others. And we'll get into that more later. But early on, it's important to know what shaped him, and how his connection with Amazing Stories came about. He was a huge science fiction fan. He started the first science fiction fanzine called The Comet. He became an excellent editor. And then through a series of serendipitous events, in 1937, he was made editor of Amazing Stories. Now, this was it was his great love, Amazing Stories. He had even sent, some years before, sent his first sale, a science fiction story called The Time Ray of Jandra, I believe. And he was thrilled to death. And but here it is, he took it over, and it was only selling about 19,000 a month. It was really about ready to be canceled. It was just hanging on by the bubble. When Ray Palmer took it over, he changed everything: the graphics, the type of the type of space opera, the type of stories that they were taking, very much in the way of science fiction adventure. And in the first month, the sales went up from 19,000 to 75,000. The second month, 90,000. And within a year, they were selling 185,000 copies a month. And then fate struck. This is where Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer come together. Richard Shaver, again, we're going to go back, we're going to catch up him in just a moment. Richard Shaver sent this letter to Amazing Stories. And he said that he had this ancient alphabet called the Mantong alphabet. And it was the alphabet that somehow he got a hold of this, where all of the alphabets throughout history, throughout the world, are derived from this. And now it was Howard Brown was another editor, and he was on duty to read the fan mail. So he got this letter with this ancient alphabet. And it also had a letter in there saying that he knew of this degenerate race that lived beneath the earth that was a danger to mankind. So Howard Brown was, Ray Palmer was his boss. Howard Brown thought this was ridiculous. And by the way, they didn't always get along. And he just laughed and he said, "This guy's a crackpot." He wadded up the letter and threw it in the wastebasket. Ray Palmer retrieved that letter, whether he was trying to get Howard Brown's goat or whether he saw something in it, because he was pretty astute when it came to finding ways to sell magazines. He unfolded it and actually published the letter, as you can see in an issue of the magazine. And it was, he did not publish the other part of it. That came later. But it had an incredible response. People really responded to it. So it really generated some sales and so forth. Now, then Shaver was inspired because nobody had listened to him, apparently, and you'll find out more about that. He sent another. Actually, it was a letter. It wasn't really considered a manuscript. About 10,000 words. It was called "A Warning to Future Man," and it detailed this. And we'll get into his mythos about what the dangers were to mankind. And of course, now this is Shaver right here, and this is in later years. He became quite an artist, but very strange artist, as you'll see. Very, very strange subject matter, and. These are the guys that he was talking about, the Dero. And again, we're going to learn more about the Dero in a moment. Now, I'll get back to what Shaver did with this manuscript, because he did something pretty unique with it. It purported to be, a true account of what is going on deep beneath the earth and why why mankind has to be so concerned about it. Now, Shaver was born in 1904 in Pennsylvania, but we're going to jump all the way up to the Depression years and get back to him when he had this experience with the welding gun. Well, the voices didn't go away, much to the disappointment of, he had just been married, Sophie Gurvich, and they were about to have, or they had a little girl shortly thereafter named Evelyn. Well, Sophie's father, Ben Gurvich, never liked Shaver, wasn't in favor of their marriage. And when he heard that Dick Shaver was having these problems with voices, he decided that, making sure I'm still recording here, okay. That would be a disappointment if I wasn't. So he was instrumental in getting Richard Shaver committed. And it was he was living in the Detroit area this time, so they sent him to Ypsilanti State Hospital. Now, this was a state-of-the-art hospital at the time. I don't think it was too horrific. Richard Shaver was able to come home on weekends, even. But then, tragedy struck again. Richard Shaver's brother had died recently, and but then his wife Sophie was accidentally electrocuted with a heater in the bathroom, and they had this little girl. And Dick Shaver was really unable to take care of her. So Ben Gurvich moved in and decided to really have Shaver committed, because Sophie had been his guardian, and that was gone. It wasn't long before Richard Shaver escaped. He went to he went out east, and but the voices kept following him. He said that they were worse. They were more tormenting in bigger cities, and we'll get into more of this, but the Dero were the bad guys, the Tero were the good guys, and it's sort of like these two forces were working against him in his mind. Anyway, he would even give names to these individuals. The one Dero that seemed to plague him all the time, he named Max. And there were two ladies, two of the Tero apparently, the good ones, Sue and Nydia, that were beneficial to him and tried to help him. I think Nydia might have been a little more like an undercover angel, if you remember the song. And enough said about that. He ended up in Canada, in Nova Scotia. I mean, he ended up in Canada, but then he stowed away on a boat, on a ship to Nova Scotia. And what happened was, it was night, it was wet, and he was going to hide in one of the holes. And so he's holding on to the edge. It's wet, it's dark. He's assuming that the drop is only about 10 feet. Well, he lets go and the drop is about 50 feet. So he's injured, he's captured, he's put in jail for a while. And this is where it gets kind of strange. Shaver, now there's a split here with the Shaver mystery. Shaver contends that he was held prisoner for years in the caverns by the Dero, and that this was really happened. Ray Palmer finds out later that Richard Shaver spent time in some mental institutions. Shaver always contended that this was a physical event. Ray Palmer did seem, and other people did say, that Palmer did really believe Shaver had experienced something, but Ray Palmer believed it was more on the astral plane, that it was not a physical event, and that's one of the places that they disagreed. So when Shaver, now Shaver has this apparently delusion that that Nydia comes to him in a projection, and the jail door opens and he's able to walk out, and she's the one that leads him into the caverns. And for a while, it's very murky, but for a while he seems to escape the attention of the bad guys, but he spends a great deal of time literally underneath the earth. But apparently it looks like he was spending a lot of time in an institution. Unfortunately, the next one was Ionia, and a lot of people went into Ionia mental institution and didn't come out. And there was somebody that had written up on it that a lot of people went in there on for very flimsy reasons, but they stayed in there and were unable to get out. Shaver was in there from 1938 to 1943. And the reason he was finally released, we think, is because his father died and his mother would have been left alone. There was some resentment toward his mother because it seems that she could have intervened and could have gotten him out earlier, but that's the way that went. So let's get into this mythos a little bit. This background that Shaver talked about, and it's it goes back to the dawn of time. The Atlans and the Titans, they were a starfaring race. They're from off-world. They created a paradise on Earth, very highly advanced, very amazing machinery and so forth. But something happens. The sun, the characteristics of the sun changes, the radiation changes, and they start to age. I mean, they live almost forever. So many of them escape in spaceships, but some stay on Earth, and they hide in the caverns. And they use the existing caverns, but they also, with their technology, expand the caverns. And they have all their advanced machinery and so forth down there. And they're those Shaver called the abandoned Dero. Dero, by the way, means detrimental robot, but not literally a robot. It means that the individual had become mutated and affected by the radiations from these machines, from these devices, to the point where they became fairly mindless and robotic, but very evil, of course. There was several races of people beneath the earth, according to Shaver. The thin people, the Dero, the small people, the giants, the norms. Now, the norms looked like us, but they could be pretty bad news. And they were all at war with each other. But they all had access to these ancient mechanisms. He called it the mech. But the problem with this is that these things could send rays to the surface of the earth. They could cause car crashes. They could cause people to attack one another. They could cause planes to fall out of the sky. And they could torment you, or there were other rays that were beneficial. So there was this constant war in Shaver's mind that was supposed to be sort of a John Keel, who was a little freaked out about the Shaver mystery when he was a kid, didn't like it at all. He called it a modern day double theory. Now, also, I want to point out, I mentioned Kenneth Arnold earlier. Shaver and Palmer in Amazing Stories were talking about essentially flying saucers that were coming from the cave people. This is before Kenneth Arnold had his sighting. So when flying saucers started to hit the newspapers, they said, well, see, this is proof of the Shaver mystery. It gets very detailed about the background and the various types of rays and so forth. Now, here's where the plot thickens a bit. I mentioned this 10,000 word manuscript that Shaver sent to Palmer, a warning to future man. Well, Palmer took it and expanded it by about 3 times and called it I Remember Lemuria. And he turned it into a fact, into fiction. But essentially it tells that story. I mean, it has central characters, it tells about this paradise on earth and how advanced they were, the way the sun changed, and then what happened to them and how some escaped the earth and others became the evil Dero deep beneath the surface. And this continued for several years. And there was a big split. A lot of the regular sci-fi fans hated the Shaver mystery. They wanted to be done with it. But I don't think, I do have the figures. Ray Palmer was selling, there were paper shortages during the war. And Ray Palmer, Amazing Stories was selling 98% of its of what it printed. So Ray Palmer had a hunch that this was going to go through the roof. But it's hard to get paper. You would have to actually steal it from the other publications. Howard Brown had Mammoth Western, I believe, and Mammoth Detective. And there wasn't any way he was going to give it up. But Richard Shaver said, don't worry, he's in contact with the Ray people, with the under earth people, the good people. And they were going to influence the circulation manager somehow to get more paper. Well, sure enough, it came, and they were able to sell another 50,000 copies, 185,000 copies sold of the first Shaver book story, I Remember Lemuria. And then, as you can see, they continued more Shaver stories. Some were just straight science fiction, but others were supposed to be autobiographical. A lot of them had stories where the protagonist escapes from the caverns, or maybe goes into the caverns, find these incredible machines and mechanisms, and uses some of them. There was one where one guy helps several people escape the clutches of the evil Dero. And also, there was a much anticipated all Shaver mystery issue one time, which really angered some of the fans. So Richard Shaver, Ray Palmer decided. Now Richard Shaver was living in Pennsylvania at this time with his wife Dorothy Shaver, and he decided to meet Shaver to see what this guy was all about, because this stuff was obviously pretty out there. So he makes the journey to Pennsylvania. I think it's near Bartow, Pennsylvania, by train. Meets Shaver and his wife, and they talk late into the night. Shaver goes to bed, and then it's one of these bedrooms that adjoins with Shaver's bedroom. You have to walk through it to get downstairs. At one point, before he's able to fall asleep, Ray Palmer starts to hear about 4 or 5 voices having a conversation. He says, it seems to come out of thin air. And there's one woman's voice, there are some men, and there's one very young voice. And what they're talking about is somebody that was horribly murdered 4 miles from there and 4 miles beneath the surface. So Ray Palmer interjects himself in this bizarre conversation and says, what is this? What's going on? The younger voice says, don't listen to him, he's an idiot. And eventually the voices fade. So Palmer doesn't get much sleep that night. The next morning, he's looking all over for wires and speakers and everything, can't find anything. The next night, he's hoping for a return visit to the mysterious voices, but he falls right to sleep. The next morning, Richard Shaver says to him, did you sleep well last night? And he said, yes. And he says, well, I contacted the Ray people and I made sure that you had a good night's sleep. Okay, so this continues on for several years. And then people start to, they really respond to this. It really touches a nerve. And so they get all kinds of letters about people that know about caverns where they've heard strange noises or even encountered a Dero or whatever. There was a CEB II, December 1945, claimed that he had memories of Lemuria like Shaver did. December 46, there's somebody that claimed that they found a cavern south of Pittsburgh. It's right at the where the first range of the Allegheny Mountains lies. And they go deep into this cave and they get to a point and they find this perfectly round, 6-foot round hole that's just carved into it that seems to go off into nowhere. So you get all kinds of letters like this. You get some pretty crazy stuff too. Bruce and Wesley Hutchinson, 12 and 16 of West Los Angeles. Well, it seems their pet turtle died. And then from the turtle, they were in contact with it. And the messages were in complete support of the Shaver mystery. So there's a confirmation right there. No one asked why the turtle didn't say much when it was alive. Then there was now sometimes there were plenty of hoaxes and some that Palmer didn't catch on right away. There was a gentleman that said that he was a graduate of Miskatonic University, and he'd been in conflict with the Dero since 1935, since he graduated in 35. And if Palmer would only get a hold of the Necromonicon in Miskatonic University, he would find out all he needed to know about the Dero. Obviously, Ray Palmer had not read H.P. Lovecraft by that time. But then there's a pretty interesting one here. Fell Street, north of San Francisco. It's in an area of where the farming wasn't good at all because of the heat and the lack of water, just a parched area. Ed John was wrote Ray Palmer about all the strange things going on and near his property. Strange noises in the house and outside the house. One time he said he saw the knob turning. Something was outside trying to get in. He talked about, now this is 1946, May 1946. A lot of this sounds like modern day UFO lore. 2 black automobiles were driving up his road at night and disappeared. They were moving fairly swiftly on this very rough road that would have destroyed the undercarriage of any other car. Shades of Men in Black before we had Men in Black. There was the CHMBS wrote Shaver quite a bit, wrote Palmer quite a bit in Amazing Stories. That stood for the Cave Hunters Mutual Benefit Society. And they went out to this area because Ed John said there was a cave in the area that he believed all this mysterious stuff was connected to. Well, this person from the Cave Hunters Mutual Benefit Society went out, and he said he was hearing voices out of the thin air, speaking in strange tongues. Sounds a little bit like the Skinwalker Ranch. His car stalled and started again several times. There were 3 other men that went out there. We don't have the names, obviously. To the cave. They said they found the cave. They blacked out for 2 hours, missing time, and they were able to get a photograph of a shadowy being. So, true or not, it's just it's pretty interesting. And then we get to some really strange stuff here. Ray Palmer got a letter. It was anonymous at first. And this gentleman, this was in June 46, said back when he was in World War II, he was flying his last mission. He was shot down over Burma. And he and his companion went into this cave, and they were attacked by, the implication is, by a couple of Dero. And they used some kind of high-tech weaponry. His companion had a hole the size of a dime in his bicep. And this other guy, the main guy, the guy that wrote the letter, said he had scars on his arm from whatever this weapon was. And he wrote, for heaven's sake, Palmer, drop the whole thing. And he blamed it on the Shaver mystery. Well, it turns out, and he writes a subsequent letter, this is Fred Chrisman that wrote this. This is the same Fred Chrisman that was called by Jim Garrison, suspected of being one of the tramps on the grassy knoll. He also is pivotal in the Maury Island incident. The Maury Island incident was in June 47, Washington State, the Harold Dahl he was a Harvard patrolman, supposedly saw these 5 donut-shaped objects overhead. One of them was in trouble, dropped some kind of slag or something, damaged his boat, injured his son, and killed the dog. It's the way the story goes. Fred Chrisman was his boss and was very much connected to this. I won't spend much time on the Maury Island incident, but everybody's connected with this. Ray Palmer gets the message, the information from Fred Chrisman. Palmer should have known better. Chrisman was sending these hoax Dero letters, and it was Fred Chrisman that got him involved in it. Ray Palmer contacts Kenneth Arnold and sends Kenneth Arnold out there to try and investigate what happened. There's a sort of a Man in Black incident. His hotel was bugged, and it was ended in tragedy when a couple Air Force officers, a plane crashed when they had taken some of this slag, which I'm sure didn't come from a UFO. I'm positive this was a hoax, but still another offshoot, another branch of the Shaver mystery. And then it's going to get even stranger here. Somebody named Charles Marceau, he was just obsessed by the Shaver mystery. And he said in 1945, the day before Christmas in 1945, he was on Saginaw Street and Union Street. This is Flint, Michigan. And he's across from the Rialto Theater, and he sees these 2 people. They're kind of disguised. They're in bulky clothes, slouch hats, but he can tell that they've got these long trunk-like noses. They are a Dero, apparently, the good guys. They're on the surface for some reason or other. They acknowledge him. They send him a telepathic message to be very cautious about protecting himself from the rays that come, the negative rays that come from beneath the earth. Marceau wants to talk to him. He walks toward them to try and have a conversation, and they disappear in the crowd. So what I did was, when my Michigan MUFON meetings were very close to this area, so I wanted to see if I could encounter any modern day Dero there. And I found the cross streets, but everything's changed. The Rialto is gone. There's a part of a university there. And I will admit that to lingering a little bit to see if I could encounter the Dero, but that didn't happen. Now, like I said, Marceau was absolutely obsessed with Shaver and the Shaver mystery. He was in contact with another man, George D. Wright. George D. Wright was also obsessed. He was a spelunker. He supposedly went in a cavern and encountered the Dero and actually lived with them for several years, several miles beneath the earth. Okay, I should be borrowing Azalea's tinfoil hat, I think. And what happened was he's supposed to have gotten a manuscript out from the caverns through some intermediaries, and they finally reached Charles Marcoux several years later. And it gives a diagram. It's Blowing Cave in Arkansas, and it gives a diagram of how to get down there, how to go down so many miles and meet with the Deros. And George wants Charles Marcoux to come and meet him. Well, that doesn't quite work out. He and his wife, Charles Marcoux, moved to Arkansas because he's spending the rest of his life trying to solve this mystery. And he's getting an expedition together. He's already got the people chosen. They're going to go to the Blowing Cave and try to go down and actually survive and meet the Dero. But then there's two stories here. One is that he's near the cave and he suddenly has a heart attack. Another one says that he was attacked by Yellow Jackets. But anyway, he dies, and it's almost as if the Ray people, the Dero, knew what he was up to and somehow intercepted him with one of their devices. But probably not the case. Now, in the 50s, the Shaver mystery was a really big deal. And after a while, Ray Palmer gets pushed out of Amazing Stories. Finally, the forces win, where they just want to go back to regular science fiction stories. They don't want any of the nonsense of the Shaver stories. There is I don't have the exact date, but you can find this online. There was a period of time when Shaver and Palmer were living right next to each other. And they were interviewed by Long John Nebel on the radio one night. Long John Nebel was the forerunner to Art Bell. This is back in the 50s, 60s. He would have a late night show from midnight to 5 in the morning. And he would have people on like James Mosley of Saucer News, the various contactees, and some people that were very lucid as far as the UFO phenomena went, and others that maybe weren't so lucid. But they'd had a lot of discussions on Shaver. Well, one time they called Shaver and Palmer. Now this is by radio phone, which I don't know exactly how it works, but the technology was all different back then. And every once in a while you'd hear this beep when they had this connection. And so they were talking all about the Shaver mystery. At one point, Long John Nebel asks Shaver, well, how did you escape? And Shaver says, well, it was a mistake. And then Nebel doesn't follow up on it. So what does that mean? The Deros stamped the wrong paperwork and they released Shaver? I don't know. But he said crazy things like, if you go to certain buildings in some of the major cities, be careful not to hit the basement button twice because it could go all the way down into the caverns where the Dero were. So be very careful. Now, later on, Shaver and Palmer became a bit estranged, I think. They, in the early 60s, Palmer resurrected the Shaver mystery in a series of books called The Hidden World. I don't think Shaver got any recognition from that. Although Palmer did publish a book called, what was it? It was Martian Diary, but I think it was The Secret World on the cover. And it had Ray Palmer's story and also Shaver's story, along with a lot of these photographs of these, what he called rock books. He believed that what he would do is actually slice the rocks to a thin sheet, and he would look at them. He was absolutely convinced that these were records of the past, and that he didn't know how to read them. But this was his interpretation of what he would see on the rocks. He would make these incredible paintings. He was quite an artist, even if not a conventional artist. And this was is what obsessed him toward his last days. And here he is again in his studio with his artwork. Now, the thing is, was Shaver crazy? I mean, what was going on with this guy? And this is where I need to let you know that Ray Palmer did not come completely clean when he was in the room listening to these voices at Shaver's house in that when he first went there in Pennsylvania in the mid-40s. He did hear voices, but they were not coming out of thin air. They were actually coming from Shaver himself while he slept, almost as if he was in some kind of trance. In fact, when the Shavers were living next door to each other, Linda Palmer, one of Ray's daughters, nobody was concerned about Richard Shaver. I mean, they would let him watch your kids. He was very lucid, even though he had these strange notions about voices and those that lived beneath. He was a pretty normal guy mostly. Mostly, okay. But Linda Palmer, when Shaver fell asleep on their couch one time over the Christmas holidays, and she also heard voices coming from him. She couldn't make them out, but this pretty much creeped her out. She never heard anything like that from him or anybody. So what was going on with Shaver? If you look at some of the great mystics, William Blake, the artist, Emanuel Swedenborg, who allegedly contacted beings from Jupiter and all kinds of entities. Joan of Arc heard voices. Even Philip K. Dick, the modern day science fiction writer, they all had sort of a similar experience that Richard Shaver did. Perhaps this is a little bit like channeling. Now, all channeling obviously isn't the same, isn't created equal. Some seems to be, now I'm not an expert on channeling, and this would take a whole nother talk, but some seems to me to come from a higher vibration, but not all channeling is accurate. So while Shaver was probably, I mean, I know that he believed what was happening to him. Everybody agreed with that, but it doesn't mean that he was getting objective information that was absolutely true. Here's another possible clue here. This gentleman, now, the picture didn't come out quite right. He's missing part of his head, and those that knew him might have said the same thing. James Tilly Matthews, he was a Welsh tea merchant and anti-war activist. Now the 1790s. This is in England, and he believes that he's being affected by an influencing machine from the Heirloom Gang. Now, this is the machine that he believed was affecting him. He believed that it existed in a room in Parliament. There was nothing like that in Parliament. This thing was operated by air, baffles, sails, and so forth. But so this was sort of his Dero, his cavern. And he believed that rays were coming out of this to affect him. One he called a kiting ray, which could put thoughts in his head, and they would be forced to stay there for a period of time, and he couldn't get rid of them. He was diagnosed, of course, 100 years after the fact, as one of the first schizophrenics. And he even, now I told you before that Richard Shaver would give names to some of the good ones and the bad ones that were affecting him. The same with Matthews. He had Bill the King, Jack the Schoolmaster, the Middleman. And so there was a very similar parallel there. But I don't know of anything where people would go into trances and where voices would come from them. There are cases of possession that they claim that kind of thing. This lady right here, Evelyn Bryant, this was Shaver's daughter. She was taken from him early on, and she was told her father was dead. And for years, she didn't know anything about him. She knew nothing about his writing, nothing about his claims about the Shaver mystery. But then finally, she found out that he was alive. I mean, but he had been alive because she found out later after his death. Ray Palmer was also dead, but she contacted Marjorie Palmer in Wisconsin. By the way, Shaver always said that the rays coming from the underworld were actually some of them were the worst in Wisconsin. So I want you guys to be careful. But Evelyn met up with Marjorie Palmer. She showed him, gave her some of her father's writings and so forth, and was able to show her slides of her father and what he looked like. It was pretty emotional for her because she had never ever known him, not beyond the when she was 2 years old. But here's an interesting thing about her. While Shaver's medium was looking at the shapes in the rock, Evelyn's medium, and she didn't know anything about Shaver or his techniques, were ink blots, and she would look at the ink blots and paint these incredibly. This isn't a very good example here. There's not much of it there, but ironically, her paintings and her style echo her father's a little bit without ever having known him. Evelyn was able to go to his final resting place. He had moved down to Arkansas. He and his wife, Dorothy, lived in a small little shack, really, in Arkansas in their last days. And also, I didn't mention that the source of a lot of this material comes from Richard Toronto, who's written some really great books on Shaver and the Shaver mystery. He had a Shavertron fanzine for the better part of a decade. Timothy Green Beckley, and of course, Richard Shaver and Ray Palmer provided all the source material for this. There's so much more. I have something like 3 dozen books that on the Shaver mystery and the Hollow Earth beliefs, and it just goes on forever. When Richard Shaver died, it was in November of '75. Ray Palmer followed him by a couple of years. He said it was like losing a brother, even though they had been a bit estranged. Ray Palmer, he after he got pushed out of Amazing Stories, he started his own publishing company, Palmer Publications, Fate Magazine, Flying Saucers, Forum, and a few other ones, Mystic. So he was, somebody else took over Fate later on, but he got a lot of these things started. And he always kind of went back to the Shaver mystery. So he was just an incredible guy that overcame amazing adversity. And John Keel calls him the man who invented flying saucers, because there he is right there, Ray Palmer. They used to play chess together a lot since they lived right close to each other. John Keel said that Ray Palmer was the one that kept flying saucers alive during a certain period of time. And it really is true if you look at his publications. Richard Shaver, what to make of him? Was any of this real? I mean, he really touched a nerve. I mean, people wrote in by the hundreds talking about their own experiences. I don't think they were all crazy. He tapped into something about the underworld. And in every culture, there's some kind of belief about the underworld. Every hero, Odysseus, Aeneas, sort of has to make that journey and come back. Now, perhaps Shaver didn't really go to the caverns, but he, in a sense, went to the underworld when he had to survive through the mental institutions. I think we will always have myths about the underworld, and they'll never leave us. And so, how do we assess this? Well, chances are there aren't really Dero deep beneath the earth. We're probably perfectly safe from influencing rays. I don't think we'll be able to say that the Dero made us do it, but for those of you that are cavers, spelunkers, and you're looking deep into the dark, and you see the usual inhabitants, bats, snakes, spiders, and so forth, I'd be a little extra cautious just to look into the darkness to make sure you're not seeing something else coming up from deep beneath the surface of the earth, looking for food or perhaps for a victim. Also, if any of you have dirt floors in your basement, or maybe a crack on the wall. People would write write Shaver and Palmer talking about the voices they would hear in their basements. So I was always a little afraid of my basement as a kid, and now as an adult, I guess I can be afraid again. So, so let me just leave you with be sure that if you ever go to one of those buildings, a high-rise building in Chicago or New York or whatever, don't ever press the basement button twice, just to be safe. Well, thank you for listening. If you've made it this far, I did want to show you briefly. I had hoped to show this at the Van Meter Visitor Festival. I made a few of these posters to kind of reflect, or to look like the old UFO magazines of the 1970s. And some have had different themes depending on the event I went to. I've got the one for the Mothman Festival. This was going to be for the Van Meter Visitor Festival. And you can't really see too much of it, but it has plenty of inside jokes. And I kind of get my a little bit of revenge with Chad Lewis. So again, thank you, everybody. And hopefully this doesn't fall here. And thank you, everybody, again, that made this possible. And goodbye.